Hello there, YouTube. Sorry, I'm in a state of undress. And I don't have my accoutrements on. What do you think about that? Will that work? All right, so I want to continue with a live reading of my book, Mounting Sleipnir. I got a little cranky last time I was on, yeah, it bothered me that somebody who, I feel kind of bad because this was somebody who was very supportive of the channel, and actually even contributed, like $1.50 or something to the webcast here. And I got upset because this person came on and instead of, what I like, instead of asking a question, dropped an opinion about something that I was getting ready to talk about. And this person, understandably, because this is part of the holes in a lot of academic understandings when it comes to linguistics about the names of deities, Vedic. This guy had conflated some things and I don't know, but I think was spouting what he had heard somebody else say. And I started to say, no, I don't remember what I said, but I think I said something to the effect of, no, that's not right. And then he doubled down and said, no, I can show you the sources. And that offended me. It offended me because I'm reading from my book. And I've already shown in my book my research, which I think is very solid in this case, which shows the lack of understanding in a lot of academic circles. And this guy kept on wanting to double down about, he was a linguist and blah, 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 instead of, having the respect of listening to, you don't have to agree with me, but at least listen and wait for what I'm going to say. Especially if I say, I'm going to talk about that. And I was in a bad mood, but I did. I found that offensive. And as we know, I have a problem with that sometimes. But, it's just, I don't like it when people operate from their emotional agendas. And in that case, I'm assuming the emotional agenda was that he wanted to be seen as an expert. And I didn't care whether I was right or wrong. I wanted to have an interaction with, hey, I've written this book. Here's what I found in the book. Why don't we, So on the one hand, it's like, again, if you're coming onto my channel, the best way to get the most out of my channel, in my opinion, now you have your own opinions, but in my opinion, read the books, do the exercises, watch the videos. If all you're doing is coming on and watching videos and nothing else, I'm happy. I want as many viewers as I can get. But you're doing yourself a disservice because it really, the whole channel is about promoting the tools. And I want to share with you the tools that I've found that have helped me to grow spiritually and personally in all kinds of other ways. So, of course, you're free to do whatever you want. My desire is to give you actual tools that can help you move forward and get what you want out of life. It's really the thing that's most important. In any case, we are going to be talking about the book, Mounting Sleipnir, and this is the third installment. And so now I'm going to be reading from, let's see, what page am I on here? From my PDF version. Now we are going to be talking from page 52 about the Vanir, Venus, and Shukrakarya. These are all different names for the same basic energy. These are all comes from the same root word, so that's why I listed them up here. Why don't I write them down here for you in case you don't have the book in front of you. So the Vanir, Venus, and Shukrakarya. These are all, the first two obviously are cognates, with each other. And then the last one is a different name, a different root word, but operating in the same area. So it's been a while since I read this, so we'll find out. All right, so let's continue. Page 52, Mounting Sleipnir. In Vedic mysticism, the southeast direction is the realm of Agni and the planet Venus. In English, we pronounce the V as a labial, meaning V, right? But in traditional Latin pronunciation, pronounces this letter as a W, a W, not a V. The words Wanes and Vanir are both cognate with the word Venus. So I think I talked about this in the last one. You can tell by looking at it that these are the same word. You can tell, right? That they come from the same root word. The word Wanes and Vanir are both cognate with the word Venus. In fact, the correct Latin pronunciation of the word Venus would sound like Venus, identical to the English pronunciation of the word wane. The English word wane plus the Latin suffix us equals Venus or Venus. Venus and wane are quite simply the exact same word. So veen, which is pronounced wane, plus us equals Venus. Got that? So can you see that? Wane is the pronunciation in English. Venus is the pronunciation in Latin. Latin still holds on to case endings, which we no longer have in English. So wane, take the nominative suffix case off of it, and you have the exact same word. Wane and wane, same word, right? You got that? That's pretty clear. While the Hindu religion has the war between the Shukras, followers of the planet Venus, and the Devas, the shining ones, the Germanic religions have the war between the earthly Vanir and the celestial Aesir. So I believe it was the last one or the one before where we talked about how the war between the Wanes and the Aesir is exactly the same war as the Devis versus the Asuras. And I went into depth sharing how the Hindus had actually shifted the words around to change the meaning, where originally the word Asura meant deity. And now it's come to mean earthly, has sort of a negative tinge to it. They call it, it's translated as demon, but that's not truly accurate. But it used to be the same word. But the mythological story is still the same, and it's because it comes from the same Indo-European root religion, where there's a war between the celestial deities and the terrestrial deities. Okay, in the Hindu, it's morphed into its own little thing, has its own taste to it, but it's still the same. It's the Asuras versus the Devi, the Asuras versus the Devas, and in the Germanic, it is the Vanir versus the Aesir. All right, so as it happens, in the planet Venus in Hindu mythology is also called Shukrakarya, which means teacher of the earthly demigods, teacher of the Asuras, which really means Wanes. Teacher of the earthly demigods. The Germanic Wanes are the earthly gods who often war with the celestial gods, the Aesir. In Vedic astrology, another planet strongly associated with Venus is Saturn. The equivalent of Saturn in the Germanic religion is Njord, who is the father of the Wanes. See the connection there? So we see the connection in both the Vedic and the Germanic forms of Indo-European religion that point back to a common Proto-Indo-European source tradition from which both traditions originated. All right. So now I'm finally going to get to the part in the book. I skipped ahead last time because the discussion went that way. As you saw, I got upset and got into an argument with somebody that was, again, not paying attention and started talking about connecting Priya um, with Frigga, and that is a common mistake. And so I tried to say, no, that's Surt, and then we got into a little back and forth, and I got upset. But now we're finally getting to the part in the book where I talked about what I talked about last time. So, in case you haven't watched that, I'm talking now about the connection between Frigga and Priya. Okay, Frigga is the wife of Woden, the queen of Asgard, and the archetype of motherhood. As we have seen, oftentimes the consonant P is softened in Germanic languages to F. Or perhaps it is the other way around, where the F consonant is hardened to a P in other Indo-European languages, depending on which pronunciation came first. I think it was a P. I think that the Germanic accent, after, again, let me give you the background on what I think happened based on the Paleolithic continuity paradigm. Between 35 and 50,000 years ago, you had Africans who spoke a language which we now call Proto-Indo-European. They came across Africa to the Northern Hemisphere. And so they got into Europe. They got into Europe and into the Near East. And then once they got there, then the Ice Ages hit, or another wave of Ice Ages hit, and then they were locked into different areas. So the people who became the Celts were blocked off on the Iberian Peninsula. They ended up, canoeing around to the western side of the British Isles, which is now Wales, which is why Wales to this day is still a home of the Brythonic people. That's why Britain was the center of Druidic training, even though Gaul, which people thought and people still think was one of the first places that the Celts came to, which is not accurate. But, so we're talking 35,000 years ago, we've got ice walls covering it, so we have these Proto-Indo-Europeans, they get landlocked on the Iberian Peninsula, they become the Celts. Then you have people getting landlocked above the Pyrenees Mountains and beneath what is now, Russia and places like that, in and around Denmark. Those people who got landlocked there by the ice, they became the Germanic tribes. People to the north became the Slavic tribes. The Aryans themselves, the people who became the descendants of the Hindus, they got landlocked somewhere in the steppes of Russia. And after, and then when things changed, they came down into India. So do you got that in your mind? So that's where the Germanic people are. They're stuffed in this little corner of northwestern Europe, surrounded by walls of ice for tens of thousands of years. Because the Ice Ages didn't end until 10,000 years ago. So imagine, 20, 30,000 years of being landlocked. Their Indo-European language takes on its own dialect, which is the same for Celtic, the same for Slavic, and the same for the Vedics. They take on their own dialect of the same language. What the Germanics do in their pronunciation is they change P's to F's. So you have this same word of Frigga and Priya, which existed before this whole separation, but they separate and then there's a slight difference of pronunciation. Got that? That makes sense? So I think that's what happened. I think the F sound came later. I think originally it probably was Priya. In any case, let's continue with the text. Perhaps it is the other way around, where the F consonant is hardened to a P, another Indo-European language, depending on which pronunciation came first. And the G sound is often softened from Germanic into Y, into other Indo-European languages. So, and this was actually true within Germanic languages itself. For example, we say egg today, right? When we're talking about those things that we eat for breakfast. That is modern English, but that is actually a Norse pronunciation. So the Vikings who came and conquered parts of England, they brought their pronunciation of the word and they called it egg. But in Anglo-Saxon, it was actually eieren. So that was the plural. So it was a, and then the plural of that in Anglo-Saxon was eieren. So you can see where there's this shift. So point is that G's and Y's, it can go either way. But lots of times, like, I don't know how to spell German, but, you've got Guten Tag, right? And in English, it's good day. So Tag and day are the same word. You oftentimes have a G turning back and forth between a Y and a G. In any case, Frigga would be very easily switched over, Priya could very easily be switched over into Frigga. Got me? Okay, let's continue. So, if we take the Sanskrit pronunciation of Priya and convert it to Germanic pronunciation, it becomes Frigga. Priya in Sanskrit means beloved. Frigga is the beloved of the All-Father and King of the Aesir, Woden. As the Queen of Heaven and the Queen of the Aesir, Frigga embodies the concept of celestial spiritual love as opposed to Freyja. Two different deities. Frigga, Freya. This is where our friend either conflated it on his own last time and or he got information from somebody who was conflating it. Because if you don't look beyond your own cultural frame of reference, which a lot of academics don't do, they have a limited frame of reference because all they're doing is reading books that other people have written down hundreds of years ago from the limited knowledge that they have. They haven't even thought about this idea. Some people have, you can go and find it, but there's still a controversy. Is Frigga and Freya the same goddess? No. Just because you can't tell the difference because they look so similar and sound so similar, it's an understandable mistake, but it just shows the lack of awareness that there are other Indo-European languages out there that are still in use. And, the lack of even the idea doesn't even enter your head to go and look at the two. So this one, you don't even have to have some of my background, like some of my background on like Thunor and Indra and why they're the same word. That's going to be hard for your average academic to figure out because he doesn't have access to seed sounds. He hasn't practiced that. He hasn't learned that. So he doesn't know that the word Thu is an Indo-European root word in the Vedic, which means the moon or the drop. And they can't make the distinction when they look at old Hittite, which his name, the name for the storm was Du. So Thu and Du, the same thing, the drop, the moon, all of that. But even so, it just shows people just have this small window that they look through. And so it's kind of amazing to me that stuff that looks so obvious to me is completely bypassed by all of academia. But such is life. Anyway, I forgot what I was saying. Let's continue. So, as the Queen of Heaven and the Queen of Aesir, Frigga embodies the concept of celestial spiritual love as opposed to Freyja, the Wain goddess of love who embodies earthly physical love and procreation. So they're both goddesses. They're both goddesses of love. One is pure celestial love. The other one is, not that this is impure, but more about physical love and fertility. All right, so, yeah, and actually the word, again, Freyja, is associated with the root word, which is a seed word, for fertility. Another Pra is the original, but you can also go to Fer. Both come from the same root word of Pra, Fra, Fer. And her name is Freyja. Right? And then Frigga comes from the word Priya. So it's easily misunderstood, but if you look at it, you'll see why it is the way that it is. And so we don't have to overthink it. Frigga and Freyja must be the same goddess. I wonder. Nope. Our ancestors knew what they were doing. You know, the reason why that bothers me, why I make fun of it, is because there's this inherent, ego about it as we're looking back at our stupid ancestors who didn't know what they were doing. And, you know, Frigga and Freyja must be the same god. You know, they knew what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. It's a different word. There's, you know, you got to start from the assumption that if we're talking about a goddess, then there must be two different words. We start from that assumption. We give them, you know, the right to understand what the hell they were doing. Right? And it's just, I find it ironic that people now in modern times who are trying to figure out what their ancestors believed, they somehow think that they know better. So they're going to make some conclusions based on their ignorance and project it onto our ancestors. This is one of the biggest problems I have with academia. Academias are really high on all the book knowledge they have, which were written down, you know, by people in post-Christian times. Christians look down on their polytheist shamanic ancestors as idiot barbarians. And so even in modern times, when people want to become pagans, they go to the source that they have because they don't look beyond their own cultural framework. And so they start looking down on their ancestors as well and start coming up with things like that. You know, I could go on and on about how that happens, but it's really easily solved. Look outside of your own echo chamber, and then you'll be able to find out very quickly what the hell is really going on. It's, again, my you know, if you want to get by in life, I say this, the two most important things that you need is to pay attention and put effort. If you do that, you can be successful in life. And I find that to be true about anything, especially things like linguistics and reconstructing the religion of our ancestors. All right, let's keep going. All right, so this is by no means an exhaustive list of Indo-European deities. So obviously I've come to the end of my comparison of deities in the book. This is by no means an exhaustive list of Indo-European deities found in both the Germanic and Vedic pantheons. Even a cursory investigation by anyone interested will unearth more deities and more linguistic connections. I'm sure that I will be investigating other Indo-European connections in later works. Perhaps this short list has motivated some readers to elaborate on what I have written here. All right, next, let's see. There's only 3 people on. Let me see, is that really accurate? It is kind of late. And it is a Saturday night. No, there's only 3 people on. All right, let's continue. Indigenous Teutonic deities. This is on page 55. In the following chapters, we will examine deities and entities that seem to be indigenous to the Germanic tribes of Northern Europe and may not be descended from any other Proto-Indo-European deities or traditions. This may be because of a few different reasons. 1. Perhaps these are deities that were worshipped by the original Indo-European migrants to Europe that were forgotten or discarded over time by other Indo-European tribes. 2. Perhaps these are deities and spirits that were exclusively discovered by the Germanic tribal shamans over thousands of years after arriving in their Germanic homeland in northwestern Europe. 3. Perhaps during the long process of cultural isolation during the Ice Ages, Germanic shamans created their own classifications for different types of land spirits. In any case, the following deities and spirits seem to be unique to the Germanic tribal form of animism. And there is a number 4 possibility, which is I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and there are connections, I just don't have the smarts to be able to figure it out. That's the 4th possibility. All right, Surt. Now we're going to talk about the fire demon Surt. Surt is the entropic fire demon of the southern fire realm that helped to kickstart the creation of the cosmos by uniting one spark of fire with the northern icy waters of Niflheim in Misthome. If you're not familiar with the word, look up the word entropy. I'm trying to think of, there was a time during this whole period, around this time, that I was writing these books. I can't remember what it was, but I was getting all these downloads from wherever about all this stuff, and I was seeing all kinds of things about not only my ancestral tradition but the universe. And I became very aware of this idea of entropy. In fact, the word entropy went into my head and I wasn't even sure I knew what it meant. So I had to go look it up. And entropy is where you have chaos that never gets put back in the bottle. Global warming is a good idea of entropy. In fact, entropy, whenever you use an air conditioner, you create entropy. In other words, it's hot outside, right? So you need it to be cool inside. So whatever happens within an air conditioner, you end up actually releasing more heat into the air outside. So you're actually making the outside hotter by a tiny minimal degree. So imagine if you're surrounded in an enclosed space with a bunch of people's air conditioner going off and releasing hot air. It would actually make things really hot. That's the small idea of how entropy works. And Surt is the deity of entropy, which is why he can't be worshipped. You can't. His only job is to create chaos and destruction and the end of the universe. And he is a force. I don't even know if he has consciousness or not. I don't think he does, but let's continue. So Surt is the entropic fire demon of the southern fire realm that helped to kickstart the creation of the cosmos by uniting one spark of fire with the northern icy waters of Niflheim. And this was in Ginnunga Gap in the center there. However, once that initial spark of Muspelheim, the fire world, touched the waters of Niflheim, the powers of the celestial gods have been focused on keeping Surt and his power of entropy safely corralled in his fiery home. That's again because the celestial deities are all about purity and keeping things. They're very conservative. They don't want to lose, they want to conserve energy. It's like, stars. Stars will eventually burn out. So they last for however many, millions and billions of years. But if it weren't for instance, for the force of electromagnetism, which is Thunar, if it weren't for the force of electromagnetism, then stars would burn themselves out much more rapidly. So that's why Thunar is a protective force, why he's an Aesir, even though he's part giant, because he protects that force of the celestial purity of the gods. And Surt is kind of the direct opposite of that. He brings chaos and destruction, which must happen. All right, so keeping Surt corralled in Muspelheim is the main mission of the warriors of Valhalla. The forces of entropy are most apparent in the forces of ignorance and mindless violence. This force of entropy is inherent in all of manifested nature, since all of manifestation has some of that first spark of the entropic fire within. The warriors of Valhalla are called by Woden to act as defenders against the spread of the destruction of unconscious ignorance, best represented by the Thyrses, who randomly destroy life without thought. Until the Germanic tribes encountered the Roman empirical mindset, they were a deeply earth-centered animist people. It was only after 1,000 years of Roman and Christian influence that our ancestors changed their focus away from fighting the entropic ignorance associated with Surt and began to embody the Thyrses who devour and destroy nature without awareness beyond themselves. As soon as Europeans discarded their ancestral knowledge, they began unleashing the power of Surt onto the world. Surt has no awareness and cannot be worshipped or fought. He is merely a force with a software-like program, or an AI-like program, to destroy the earth if unleashed. The only way to deal with Surt is to keep him safely trapped in Muspelheim. Once he is unleashed, there is no way to put him back in the bottle. Greek pagans believed that, so we're talking about the Greek polytheists, the pre-Christian polytheists of Greece, believed that the celestial fire was a healing force and terrestrial fire was destruction. So you got that? They had this understanding that there was this entropic fire that came out of, the earth or the underworld. And there was celestial fire, like the kind of heat that comes from the sun. So they had this understanding between two types of fire. One was destructive, one was destructive. As a result, back to the text, only olives picked straight from the branch that had not touched the ground could be used for fueling the sacred lamps in the temple of Athena. Once olives had fallen and touched the ground, they were considered to be impure from contact with terrestrial fire. The terrestrial fire was seen as destructive the moment it manifested above ground. The pre-Christian polytheist Greeks would have been mortified to know that we moderners are digging up petroleum and burning it. That was, in their eyes, a way to completely destroy all life on Earth. If global warming is indeed caused by the burning of unearthed petroleum fuels, then perhaps the ancient Greeks were right. They must have known something we didn't. So again, this is just one of those things where, the Christian religion wiped out our understanding, and, probably would have been, a completely different world if we, especially with the amount of respect that even the Roman world had towards the Greeks. You can imagine, the Greek priests saying, hey, this is a really bad idea. Do not burn anything that's come out of the ground. And, that just shows that there was an instinctual understanding that released greenhouse gases in a really, negative way. There's an understanding that, maybe you don't know this. I mean, I'm not much of a scientist myself, but the only reason that we have petroleum is because there was an epoch during the evolution of plants where trees that were just evolving millions and millions and millions of years ago, long before dinosaurs, by the way. So whatever you heard about petroleum being the bones of dinosaurs is complete nonsense. Dinosaurs had not even come into existence by this time. But there was an epoch, I don't even know how many millions of years ago it was, where the trees that were evolving, when they would fall to the ground, they wouldn't decay. So they'd get pushed under the ground on top of dust and everything like that, and then over time they turned into oil. So that's what oil is. It's plant life that didn't know how to decay. Now, the idea is that this is actually fuel underneath the earth, that the earth herself needs this fuel the same way that she needs, radioactive, rocks and things like that. This is part of her fuel bank, but it needs to be kept underneath. When you take it out, you're releasing Mother Earth's own fuel, and then you're releasing it into the atmosphere in all kinds of really destructive ways. So the Greeks, at the very least, had a shamanic intuition about this. And so maybe they didn't understand from a modern scientific perspective, but they understood that this was not a good idea. And again, this is just another example of why we should be listening to what our ancestors believed. All right, now we're done with Surt. Now let's talk about Woden. Woden as shamanic initiator. Woden is often correctly associated with the shaman, but it was actually the giant Ymir who is the first shaman recorded in Teutonic myth. Well, it's been so long since I wrote this, I don't even know where I'm going here. Back to the text. But Ymir was initiated by Woden himself when Odin, Vili, and Ve dismantled Ymir and used his body parts to create the manifested cosmos. Okay, now I know where I'm going. Woden, Will, and Whale, or Odin, Vili, and Ve, initiate Ymir by dismantling him to create the cosmos. All true shamans experience an initiation where they are dismantled and put back together again. It is a sacrifice of self to the ancestors. Woden sacrificed himself on the world tree in order to discover the runes, the mysteries. Ymir sacrificed himself by giving his body to be dismantled in order to create the physical cosmos. This is why the Vedic equivalent of Ymir is the god of death and also eternal life. So in case you don't know, in Old Norse it's Ymir, in Vedic it's Yama, comes from the Proto-Indo-European Yemosh, which means twin or dual. That's where the word Gemini comes from, because you take the G and turn it into a Y. Yemeni, Yemosh. Whoops, where am I? This is why the Vedic equivalent of Ymir is the god of death, Yama, and also eternal life. So, in case you're not familiar with it, the god Yama is worshipped if you want eternal life because he overcame death. And and he represents self-sacrifice, sacrifice of the ego. So by worshiping Yama, death, which is restriction, you actually learn to become eternal. And the mantra, the Triambakam mantra, which is a staple. I believe I'm right about this. I'm okay if I'm not, but I think I'm right about what I'm about to say. So if you've heard that mantra, which I have videos of me chanting it, Triambakamya Jammahe Sugantim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhanam Rityur Mukshiyam Amritat. That is also called the Markandeya mantra, which Markandeya was a boy, I believe, who traveled to the underworld to face the god of death, and as a result of his meeting with the god of death, he overcame death because of his purity. So this is, I think Yama might have given him that mantra. I can't remember. In any case, now you understand why Ymir is associated with birth as well as life and death, and why his sacrifice, being torn apart in order to create the cosmos, is actually a very life-giving thing. And it represents, for shamans, because the shamans traditionally, when somebody goes through a shamanic initiation, they become sick, they might go insane, they might die and then come back to life. But oftentimes they also have a shamanic vision where they, perhaps when they're sick, if they go through a near-death experience, they have a shamanic vision where they're chopped into pieces by the ancestors and then put into a pot and then stirred around and then pulled out whole again. So this whole idea of being taken apart, it has this idea of being reborn on a spiritual level. And many shamans go through that. Even if they don't have a vision, I certainly did. They'll go through an experience where they're feeling torn apart. That's why a lot of people want to be shamans. It's like, do you want to go through that kind of transformation? Woden is unique to Teutonic tribes. According to my research, Woden, aka Odin, does not seem to be linguistically connected to any other Indo-European god outside of the Teutonic pantheon. There is a phrase used in India which is simply Wa. Wa. It is an expression of spontaneous, ecstatic awe, usually directed toward a deity. Wa Kalima, Wa Shivaji, whatever. I believe our modern English wow may be related to this. So before I go any further, let me just say that I found something really interesting. So, two things I found. When you go to the hillbillies of North Carolina or the Appalachians, you'll find that they say things in a weird way. They'll say, instead of hunger, they'll say, I got a hankering. I got a hankering. Well, do you know what the Old English word for hunger is? Hankar. I got a hankering. So they're actually speaking Old English there. I want to ask you a question. Now that has been it's weird it's come back because it's a mispronunciation of ask. But it shows something. What you see here is you see, quote, lower class people and you see kids actually speaking more accurately in more ancient ways. We think it's cute, we think it's inaccurate, but it's actually more accurate. So when you ask somebody a question, the Old English word for ask was axion. So that's actually the when you want to say it right, you say I want to ask you a question. That's actually more accurate. Little kids talk in ways too, like why for? Now a kid will say why for, and we'll say no, just why. But actually he's right, because in older English you hear this in Shakespeare, wherefore. Now, if you want to find out how educated somebody is, ask him, what does wherefore mean when Juliet says, wherefore art thou Romeo? You'll find out how educated somebody is because they'll say where, it'll mean, oh, it means where. But it doesn't mean where, it means why. Why for? Wherefore? We say what for? What for? Now, that's not necessarily wrong, but it's not really, if somebody really wants to act like they're speaking truly correctly, they're not going to say what for, they'll say to what end or why. They won't say what for. Why did I go off on this tangent here? Because the word wow is just an exclamation. We would say it doesn't mean anything, but it's very endemic to English. English people say wow, whoa, whoa. It's another one. Remember as a kid growing up in junior high school, whoa, man, whoa. I believe that this whoa, let's see, whoa and wow are just simply Germanic pronunciations of the same Indo-European expression of awe and ecstasy, which is wah, wah. So in India you go wah. You don't go whoa or wow, you go wah. We would say it's just an expression, but I think it was an actual word. You get where I'm going with this because the name of the god Woden is Wod plus the suffix n, which means inspiration. We would say inspiration master, but it means inspiration and then made of. So Woden means he who is made of inspiration. We use that phrase, that suffix still a little bit. It's an ancient suffix, but we still use it. Woden means made of wood. Golden means made of gold. So we still use it. Woden is made of wood. Whoa. Wow. Wow. All right. So I believe our modern English word wow may be related to the Germanic word for conscious awareness, Wod. The name for the god Woden means master of ecstatic awareness. Woden, master of Wod. Perhaps wow and wah are remnants of an Indo-European expression for awe directed toward the gods in worship. If this is true, perhaps the name Woden could be translated as master of wow. In the USA, when we experience something awe-inspiring, it is not unheard of to hear someone exclaim, whoa, as in, whoa, dude, that was awesome. As the Germanic god of shamanic awareness, Woden has similar counterparts in just about every other polytheist religion. But since I am not able to linguistically connect his name to any other deity, I must conclude that he is unique to the Teutonic tribes in terms of pronunciation and word. So a lot of people ask me and say, what is the equivalent of Odin in, like somebody asked me recently, what's the equivalent of Odin in the Greek tradition? There isn't one. What is the equivalent of Odin in the Roman tradition? There isn't one. What is the equivalent of Odin in the Vedic tradition? Shiva. And I've talked about that because Shiva and Woden appeared in the historical records at the same time. So again, that just tells me that there's this energetic connection between the Vedics and the Germanic tribes. They still, even though I believe they were separated by probably 25, 30,000 years, there's still this strong energetic connection because they seem to have such a similar connection to the gods that they worship. You know, you don't see that same, and I'm not an expert in Celtic or in Slavic, but I haven't seen that same direct one-on-one. You have very close, almost direct one-on-one with Greek and Latin. They're sort of grouped together. You've seen me use them, but there's a difference, slight difference there in the mythology. But the mythology of the Germanics and the mythology of the Vedics are so closely connected. And it could be because if I'm accurate, that the Vedics, who were originally the Aryans, and I can't remember, I saw this a long time ago, but there was, on the steppes of Russia somewhere, there was a city state, like a complex that was unearthed, which coincided with the timing of just before the writing of the Vedas. So the Vedas, if you've read the Vedas, they talk about the Aryans, or the Vedic tribes. They're coming from somewhere north of Afghanistan. So that's all we know, that they're coming from somewhere north of Afghanistan, and they come into what is now Afghanistan. So when you read the Vedas, that's where they're coming into, to what is now Afghanistan. They go into Afghanistan, and then, which of course wasn't Afghanistan then, and then they go into the continent of India, and it is my belief that they interbred and intermarried with the local Dravidians. But that's why in Afghanistan, the Sikhs, for instance, the Sikh tradition comes from Afghanistan. Even their modern language that they speak there is very similar to Vedic Sanskrit. So the point being is that they might have been, I don't think they were related. I don't think that they traded with each other. I think that they were separated by tens of thousands of years, but they might have been, there might have been one tribe that came up there and split off, and one went over into the I'm looking, in my mind, I'm looking at a map here. They went up to the steppes of Russia, and another one went west and ended up in what is now Denmark, and then a bunch of ice age walls came in and blocked them off. But they might have been they might have been the same tribe originally. So there's a real possibility that there could have been waves of these Indo-European migrants, as they're coming from Africa, which would explain why there's some fundamental differences between, the Greek and the Roman, which tend to be very similar, and then the Celtic, which has its own flavor, and then the Slavic has its own flavor. So I think probably the Vedic and the Germanic, I could be totally wrong. They may have been, closely related, or the same tribe that got split up about 35,000 years ago. And then because they were separated by 35,000 years, their language and their religion would stay similar, but their ethnicity would change based on their adaptation to the local climate, as well as interbreeding with Neanderthals and things like that, all that kind of stuff. Because the truth is, people get so wrapped up. People get so wrapped up in, like when it comes to this, where did white people come from thing? People get so wrapped up in looking at how different the DNA is from, a modern Western European from an African or something like that. And it's like, well, yeah, what the hell do you expect? They're separated by 30, 40,000 years and ice age conditions. I mean, what the hell do you expect is going to happen? Their DNA is going to change because they're going to adapt to the local conditions. So again, just the small-mindedness really, really bothers me. I have a hard time with it. Anyway, so back to what I was saying here. All right, so By the time of the Christian conquest of Scandinavia, Woden had been firmly placed as the head of the Germanic pantheon of deities. However, there is some evidence that Woden had replaced Tyr or Tyr as the head of the gods. It seems that around the time of the Roman conquest of Europe 2,000 years ago, that some of the Germanic tribes worshipped Woden as the Allfather, and some other tribes recognized Tyr as the ancestral Sky Father. I don't know where I came up with that. I don't know if I had read that somewhere or if I came to that conclusion. I'm not married to that conclusion, but it's possible. Certainly by the time of the Vikings, Woden had been fully embraced by all remaining Germanic polytheists as the celestial leader. The fact that Odin, Vili, and Ve were seen in the Norse myths as the triad of deities that helped in the creation of the universe indicates to me that these deities were probably very ancient in the Teutonic worldview, but perhaps were seen as lesser deities in comparison with other well-known deities such as Thunor, Tyr, and Freyja until later times. I'm struck by how interesting it is. We have the same evolution in Vedic mythology. In Vedic mythology, the main god is Indra. Indra was the son of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. And he stole, through combat, he defeated his father and stole the lightning bolt. So that's how he became the lightning goddess. He stole it from Deus Pita, which is, as you know, in the Vedic, Deus Pita is cognate with the Latin Diu Piter, or Jupiter. So Jupiter is the lightning god in the Roman, because they were holding on to that same scenario. Same with the Greeks. Deus is, it's just basically another pronunciation of Zeus. Deus, Zeus. It's the same pronunciation. I mean, it's the same word. Same root of D. So in the Greek tradition, Zeus is the thunderbolt god. He's also the king of the heavens and the sky father. But in both the Vedic and the Germanic, you have the thunder god is the son of the sky father who stole the lightning or won the lightning. I don't know exactly how. Yeah, we don't have that in the Germanic. That has to have been the case though, because it's obviously the same deity. Tyr is D, is Deus, is Zeus, Jupiter. So Tyr must have been the lightning god at some point. How Thor, we don't know. By that time, the only mythology left we have is post-Odin, which means that people are going to say that he is again the son of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. At that time, Woden had become the Sky Father, even though he's a different deity in his own right, because Tyr still existed. They didn't replace Tyr with Odin. They left Tyr there as the god of war, which really means something else altogether differently. Anyway, so I find that interesting at this, what probably around the same time again, we probably had this shift where the thunder god became the son of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, and then over time, the Norse mythology sort of lost that, because we never hear about how Thor became the lightning god. He just is the lightning god. But he's the son of Woden and Frigga, right? Anyway, I thought that was interesting. So let's keep going. So if Woden is a relative latecomer as the Allfather of the Teutonic deities, then that indicates to me that as the power of shamanic consciousness, let me finish what I was saying. What I was saying is at the same time as Odin, Vili, and Ve becomes something to worship, a trinity. Odin, master of consciousness. Vili, power, willpower. And Ve is spirit. In fact, the word for temple in the Old Norse is Ve. It means heart. But you have the cognate of Ve and Vishnu. Vishnu is the protector. So you have the same trinity in the Hindu, which is Shiva and Brahma and Vishnu. Odin, Vili, and Ve, Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu. And you have a cognate between Ve and Vishnu, comes from the same root, Ve. And then you have different words. Shiva is not the same as Woden, and Brahma is not the same as Vili. Two different words. But we have the same concept. So I find that interesting. So I am concluding that there was some resonance between these two religions and cultures, even though they weren't communicating with each other, that they started evolving along the same lines, where Tiu is replaced as the head of the gods with Woden, who sort of is this new god that appears out of nowhere but takes over as though he's been there forever. Same exact thing happens in the Vedic, where you have Indra, who is the king of the gods. But then as we start moving towards the Hindu period, then we have this new head of the gods, Shiva, who is pure consciousness. So you have that connection of Woden being the shamanic master of awareness, and you have Shiva being the master of highest meditative consciousness. Shiva and Woden both have the same scenario where they are part of a trinity. But of the trinity, the one who's worshipped the most is the highest one. Now that's not entirely the same in the Vedic or the Hindu tradition, because Vishnu becomes extremely important, and Brahma falls and loses importance. And so again, in our word, we don't even use the word, we use the word Vili as willpower, but the thought of that being a god, we've forgotten all about that. We've completely forgot about Vishnu, but and Woden. We've forgotten about all of them now that I think about it. Anyway, you get where I'm going with this. You can see that there's this really strong connection. It's not a linguistic connection. It's not a historical connection. It's a really interesting coincidence that seemingly around the same time, Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu show up in the Hindu tradition as the trinity of gods, around the same time that Odin, Vili, and Ve seems to appear in the Germanic tradition as the trinity of gods. All right. If Woden is a relative latecomer as the all-father of Teutonic deities, then that indicates to me that as the power of shamanic consciousness, Woden was becoming more important to the pre-Christian Germanic tribes than the power of war, Tiu. As I have already suggested in my first book, I believe that if the Germanic peoples had not converted to Christianity, this shift from war to consciousness, Tiu to Woden, would have been able to facilitate a shift from a culture of warfare to a culture of spiritual empowerment, which is what happened with the Vedics. The Vedics were definitely a warrior culture. That's why they worshipped Indra, because Indra was this conquering warrior king. And now, there's this whole different mindset surrounding Hindu religion where you have Shiva, who's this peaceful meditation, master who sits on the top of the mountain and meditates. I believe that's where things would have gone with Woden. Woden is a different deity. He's a little more fierce, although Shiva has his own side, which I'm sure I talk about here. One of the names for Odin is Ug, which means terrible. And then you have, in the Vedic, you have Ugra, which means terrible, meaning frightening, not bad, evil, but frightening, horrific, frightening, awful. Same word. So interesting, at some point, they find the exact same Indo-European word to describe this master of highest awareness, terrible. So by the time that the Christianity took over, Woden was still seen as this war god because the Germanic people were still, I believe, making a shift from warfare to more spiritual understandings. That's hard to do because they lived during the time of the Roman conquest of Northern Europe. So they never really got a chance to let go of that and sort of settle into the spiritual vibe that seemed to want to happen. They had to constantly be at war with Rome and with each other and with all that kind of stuff. So Woden still had this warrior Germanic aspect to him. But, Woden is Mercury. Planet Mercury is not a warrior. He's a thinker. So anyway, you can see where I'm going with this. I think that the Germanic tribes now, who are known as the most violent, racist, they have that. Had they been left to themselves, and or had they responded differently, I believe that the Germanic tradition would have become one of high spirituality and peace. The same as the Vedics, who went from this warfare king of war Indra, and now you have Shiva and other aspects of Vishnu. Which so we associate the Hindu religion with peace, nonviolence, but they weren't that way, a long time ago. When they were in the Vedic period, anyway. Okay. Back to the book. So just as the war-centered Vedic religion evolved into the more mystical modern Hindu religion, I believe that if Rome had not conquered Europe and instituted empirical monotheism, that the Germanic polytheist religion would have evolved into a more mystical form of polytheism similar in spirit to modern Hinduism. In other words, Europe and the Western world would most likely be a very different place today if the Germanic and Celtic tribes were allowed to follow their original Indo-European polytheist animist heritage. As it happened, the Germanic peoples, as represented by the cultures that have been spawned by their descendants, English, American, German, French, Spanish, Scandinavians, Australians, etc., have had a pronounced influence on the transformation of the whole globe through scientific and technological advancements. So it seems that the power of consciousness was making its mark on the world through Woden. Unfortunately, though, the spread of Christianity and imperialism stopped that spiritual transformation before it could be completed. Next chapter. Woden, will, and Weoch. Woden, will, and Weoch is the Old English words for shamanic consciousness, willpower, and numinous sacred spirit, respectively, or Odin, Vili, and Ve. You may be familiar with this trio as they are known in Old Norse as Odin, Vili, and Ve. According to Norse myth, these three brothers are responsible for manifesting the material world and giving life, willpower, and spirit to humans. As an animist mystic, I believe that each of these powers can be found in the three major centers of energy consciousness within the body. Wod resides in the upper centers of the brain or third eye, Will resides in the navel center, and Weoch resides in the heart center. I explain how this triad is used in internal alchemical meditation more fully in my first book, so I won't repeat myself again here. The triad of mind, body, spirit, heaven, earth, man, Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu have seem to be universal understandings of human spiritual experience, also reflected in the Teutonic worldview with the three aspects of Woden. And then I have this graph here, which I'm not going to get into, but you find this all over the world. Woden, will, and Weoch in the Germanic tradition. Odin, Vili, and Ve in the Norse. Father, Son, Holy Spirit in the Christian. Christian tradition does not, according to the Old or the New Testament, have any Trinity in it whatsoever. That was completely imposed by Germanic, because by then the Roman, the people who took over the Roman Empire were none other than the Goths who sacked Rome. So they're bringing their ancestral spiritual knowledge and all of that to Catholicism. And so they create Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then you have in the Taoist tradition, Tien Di Sun, which is heaven, earth, and man. And then you have in modern days, you have mind, body, spirit. And then, of course, you have Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu. Even the Christians adopted their own triad they call Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It is interesting to note here that in the Christian scriptures, there is no mention of any such triad. Nowhere in the Christian New Testament will you find the words Trinity or Father, Son, Holy Spirit. These words are found separately in unrelated contexts, but they are never found together in Christian scripture. In order to place these ideas together into coherent Christian doctrine, one must do a great deal of cutting and pasting from among the Gospels in order to extract any semblance of this concept from Christian scriptures. In fact, the idea that Jesus himself is identical to Almighty God is not directly taught in the Gospels either. This identity of Jesus' equality with the Father had to be inserted by later editorialists like St. Paul, or as in the beginning of the Gospel of John. The idea of the Trinity itself did not exist until hundreds of years after the inception of organized Christianity, and only after heated and prolonged controversy. In fact, people were put to death over it. The Trinity was eventually imposed upon the Hebraic concepts presented in the early Christian Gospels and forced upon the Christian clergy by the Roman Imperial Church. Modern Christians accept this idea of the Trinity as inherent teaching of Christ, but it only arose after his supposed death and took hundreds of years of controversy concerning this idea before it was accepted as Orthodox dogma. Even when the Trinity became official church doctrine, it was forced upon many resistant Christian clergy under the pain of excommunication and even death. Most of the early Christian founders did not believe in the Trinity because it was too reminiscent of polytheism, or as they called it, paganism. Why is the Christian Trinity important to Teutonic animism? Because I believe that this idea of the triune God was imposed upon Christianity because the indigenous European animist polytheist understanding of reality was too deeply ingrained into the European psyche, and, try as they might, European Christians just could not let go of their traditional animist understanding of Wod, Will, and Wael. I think the apparent need of humans to express this experience of a triad indicates that this is a universal human experience, and without it, the human mind just does not feel satisfied. Hence the need of European Christians to insert this triune idea of the Godhead into a nominally monotheist religion. While Christians call the Trinity a divine mystery that deepens their faith, most non-Westerners simply find it odd that a religion that is so militant in its monist view of deity that still worships three different gods as one. It is interesting to me that linguistically only one of the three powers of Woden, Will, and Wael are recognizable to modern English speakers, that is being the word will. The meaning and pronunciation of the word will has survived intact into present times, but the concepts of Wod, shamanic consciousness, and Wael, sacred spiritual power, has been lost from our modern English language and consciousness. Will corresponds with the lower dwarf nature of energy and physicality. So if this is the only remaining force of the triad, Woden, Will, Wael, that has survived in our modern consciousness, then it is indicative to me of our modern state of limited spiritual evolution resulting in our primary physical reactive focus of survival and warfare. This means then that we modern Westerners are only operating from a purely physical, unconscious state of being, or subconscious state of being. Will, separated from Wod and Wael, is limited to the drives of violence, greed, procreation, and animal fear. Without willpower, we would not physically survive, but without Wod and Wael, we never reach our fulfilled nature as manaj, or divine mind. Without the force of manaj, which is none other than come on, Manaj, where are you? Probably the last one, right? Manaj. The rune Manaj. Without the force of Manaj, we are simply the animal host that does not allow divine mind an avenue of expression in this physical world. We are merely physical vehicles without a driver. According to Teutonic myth, dwarves dwell under the earth and are therefore blind without the guidance of Wod and Wael. Is it any wonder that modern humans run around blindly destroying their environment? Reminds me of, where I think the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I think, was, divinely channeled. Is that in that you have the dwarves who, left to themselves, worship the elves. But in that one, you have this warfare between the dwarves and the elves. And what do? They, you see this in the Hobbit, where they just hoard all of their wealth. They keep digging under the ground and unearthing gems and gold and other things like that, and they hoard it, which attracts a dragon. Now, if you're not familiar with it, the dragon in Germanic mythology is actually sort of a monstrosity that is created from a dwarf. You have Sigurd and Fafnir, and Fafnir becomes a dragon, and Fafnir is called a dwarf, and Fafnir is said to be the brother of Sigurd. Sigurd is a human, Fafnir is a dwarf. You look at them before their transformation, they look exactly the same. Which means that just because you're walking around in a human skin suit doesn't mean you're operating from manage. You could be operating from purely your willpower or your dwarf nature. And just like in The Lord of the Rings, the dwarves, when they're not worshiping the elves, which are the higher awareness, when they're not connected to higher awareness, then they become greedy, they become violent, and they cause all kinds of destruction. And then what ends up happening is that they morph into dragons. And what does the dragon do? He sits around just in his pile of riches. And when he comes out, he brings this entropic fire and destroys everything. Can you see the connection here? This is the power of mythology. This is why mythology and understanding it is so important. Let's see. So, organized Christianity, therefore, instead of liberating Europeans into a more evolved state, has reduced us literally to mindless, violent animals only concerned with meeting our base physical survival needs. Without Woden and Weoch, we are nothing more than blind dwarves hammering out a base physical existence disconnected from the guidance of our higher selves, the ascended masters, the light elves. All right, so I think I'm going to stop there because then we're going to move into something else. I think shamanic journeying or something like that. I've been talking for how long now? How long have I been talking? For an hour and a half, so I've been talking a lot. There's still only, looks like there's 9 people on here. Let's refresh the page. We have 10 people, a whopping 10 people on here. All right. So, I don't think there was any questions. There might have been one a long time ago. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? I don't see the question. Oh, there's one question here. Frigga and Hella White. Question. Oil from the sap, perhaps. I don't know what you're talking about. Oil from the sap. What does that have to do with... I was talking about how the Greeks did not use olives that had fallen to the ground. If an olive falls off the branch and falls to the ground, they can't use it to light the lamp of the sacred light in the Temple of Athena. You can only use if it's spiritual, meaning if it's celestial. So that says a lot. So apparently you could still eat it and use it and maybe cook with it, but you couldn't put it in the temple because it had become part of the entropic fire of the earth. I'd be interested to know if there's something that changes after the olive has fallen off the branch, if there's something that changes within the olive. For instance, oranges. One of the things that frustrates me here in this city where I'm at is that one of the grocery stores I go to, when I go to the juice section, it's all orange juice. They don't have any, like anything like this, any kind of red or dark stuff, because I like that, the blueberry, strawberry, raspberry. I like all that stuff. And I don't drink bottled orange juice because once oranges are plucked from the tree or they fall from the tree, they go acidic. Have you ever noticed that when you go to a restaurant and they pour you orange juice, that sometimes it just tastes wrong and it's just really acidic? You shouldn't be drinking orange juice after it's fallen from the tree or after it's been plucked. Freshly squeezed orange juice pulled right off of the branch, that's really good for you. Don't go around drinking orange juice. It's just, by the time it's been sitting, it's been sitting around and then made into juice and then sit in bottles. Even if fresh squeezed, if the oranges have been sitting and aren't part of the tree, you shouldn't drink it. It's just really acidic and it's not that good for you. So I'm wondering if olives have the same scenario. I have no idea, but it would be interesting if they, knew that as well. When I was speaking of petroleum, so yeah, what does that have to do with the sap of the trees? Oil from the sap, perhaps. This is why, again, if you guys are going to ask a question, just expect that I'm not going to know the context. Write a whole question with a subject, put it in context so I know what you're talking about. That's frustrating to me because I want to answer your question, but you gotta, you gotta give the question that's, it's due. The question itself, you got to treat it like a being. You're giving birth to this concept, to this idea, to this question. Give it a full life. Don't just give it like one arm and one leg. Give it a full body. So, whatever. John Walter, Earth is flat. What part of anything that I've said in any way said anything to do with whether the Earth was flat or not? I mean, are you just incapable of like controlling the impulse to speak something? I mean, do you have Tourette's syndrome? Do you walk around and go, "Earth is flat"? I mean, is it something that you do? That you walk around in public and you blurt out things that go against the, scientific properties? Gravity doesn't exist. Earth is flat. I mean, seriously. I didn't even talk about it. Why was that? Why did you need to do that? I mean, do you want to look like an idiot? Is that important to you? That's something you enjoy? Anyway, so Frigga and Hella, I would have been, again, I'd be interested to know why you asked the question, because you're onto something there. If I just go by what you said, sap from the tree would not be a bad thing because it hasn't come from the ground. It hasn't hit the ground. It's still coming out of the tree. If we're following the same logic, it might not even work. It might not, might only work with, because sap isn't something you burn. Oil is something that they use to burn, olive oil is something they burned in lamps. So it might not have a connection there, but anyway. All right, that's it. I don't see any more questions here. And so I'm hungry and I got stuff I got to do, so I'm going to call it a day. Lockdown.thunderwizard.com has shifted. In case you don't know, go check it out. I have reduced the price by $100, and that is because the whole lockdown scenario, although people are still locked down, I think there's enough shift going on that, that whole idea of locking down and then everything is okay, I think that time has passed. It's working here in Australia and it's working in New Zealand, maybe some other places. But, the whole idea of lockdown is shifting. So I'm going to let that fade. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out from the lockdown package, I'm going to take out the personal sessions. Now, if you've already paid at the original price, people keep asking me this, don't worry, you can still have sessions with me. But my time has become limited because of so many people, and I do have other people I have to work with. So the lockdown package will continue at a reduced price. You get everything, which amounts to $3,214 worth of stuff. And you end up, after everything is said and done, it's about $2,000 worth of stuff. So you're saving, $1,500 to $2,000 on all of the stuff that I teach. So you just won't be able to talk with me personally, but you still get all of the certifications and all the videos. So go check that out. Thunderwizard.com is my subscription site. If you want to support the channel, and if you want to, again, get the most out of this teaching, then go and learn the shamanism that I teach. Do the rituals. Learn about runes. Learn about rune rituals, and learn about shamanic rituals and energy work and just shamanism in general. I teach you from A to Z. People have been asking me ever since I started this channel, I need to be told what to do from A to Z. Well, that's what the thunderwizard.com site is. You learn from the beginning, from A to Z, what shamanism is. And then, of course, there's the Manifestation Mastery course, which I give you go into depth about all that. So thunderwizard.com is the place to learn all of that and to support the channel. And, of course, courses.thunderwizard.com mostly is in the lockdown package, but there's some things like books and videos which you can only get through there. Of course, if you want to achieve enlightenment, or if you want to go to Valhalla, there's one thing you can do. Subscribe and hit the bell button, and you will be immediately, I will give you, dispensation to go directly to Valhalla. All right, so let's see here. Pitch that you get from Pine. Yeah, maybe she did. All right. Oh, here she goes. I was wondering if sap perhaps may ferment into oil. I guess I must. I have no idea. I have no clue. John Walter, I don't know what he was doing there. Earth is olive shape? Question mark. Is that a full sentence? I really appreciate full sentences. So again, a little more of just kind of Tourette syndrome of the what are you on your phone? You can only punch in so many at a time. I can't. My thumbs are too big. It's so weird. People have this whole way of typing now. And I learned how to type this way, so I only use one finger. It's ridiculous because I'm such a dinosaur. Now he's retracted that. All right. That's it for me, guys. Nothing more to be said. So I'm gonna call it a day before I let Surt fly out of my mouth and attack somebody else. All right, guys, that's it. I will talk to you all later. And please do me a favor, support the channel in whatever way you want. Thunderwizard.com or lockdown.thunderwizard.com. Subscribe, hit the bell button. And of course, also, any of these videos that you like, post them on your Facebook, your Twitter, post them where people can see them. That's another good way to support the channel. All right, that's all for me. I talk to you all later. Let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, right there. All right, talk to you all later.